and welcome to Live Healthy Now. I have today with me a really lovely guest who I'm sure is going to be talking about something that is so relevant to so many of our female listeners. And if you aren't female, then I still encourage you to listen along, because I think there's a lot that can be learned by everyone for this topic today. So I'm joined by Dr Lisa Kwapniowski, who's a pharmacist and health and wellbeing coach, and she supports women in perimenopause and menopause to regain energy, decrease brain fog and lose stubborn weight gain through balancing hormones naturally. And this is something that I'm super excited about to be diving into with Lisa today. So Lisa really advocates creating sustainable lifestyle behaviour changes, which is completely aligned to our framework at Life Now Coaching, because we know that in order to live and feel healthy, it really is all about building habits that become part of who you are and flow into your lifestyle. So let's get started and find out more about helping you if this is the season of your life that you're in right now. So welcome, Lisa. It's really great to have you here today.
Thank you, Nicola. I'm so excited to be here and to be able to share some of these valuable insights.
Yeah, brilliant. So just before we dive into the topic of perimenopause and menopause, just to find out a little bit about you, I'd love to know what your most impactful healthy habit is that you have in your daily routine.
I would say the most impactful healthy habit that I have is really focused on being very intentional with my sleep. I know that when I do not get enough sleep, everything kind of goes haywire. You know, I don't eat well the next day. I can't function well. I don't want to exercise. So it really does seem to drive so much of my overall well-being.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. And I talk about sleep being really like underrated, and there's a lot of lack of awareness about the importance of good quality sleep. It's not just enough sleep, is it? It's having the right quality. And I'm with you in that when my sleep's poor, it does really impact how you go about your next day in every way. And since becoming a health and wellness coach as well, I've learned so much about the reasons why that is. You know, it's not just that we can't be bothered and we just, we choose to make bad choices. It's actually things that are physically happening, isn't it, because of that lack of sleep?
Right. Yeah, it affects and drives so much of our hormone changes the next day, whether it's cortisol or how our insulin is processed in the cells, which we'll talk about later. But it really sets you up to be successful the next day. And, you know, when I was younger, I didn't think a lot about it, or when I had little kids, you know, it was just sleep was a luxury. And now I really, you know, try to promote it more as a priority and make sure that people are really focusing in on that. I spent a lot of time over the last several months kind of really analyzing my sleep patterns and looking at all the things that impact it, both positive and negative. So it's something that's really important to me.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And if I ask you to tell me, like, what does living healthy mean to you?
So living healthy to me is really focusing as much as possible on making good, healthy choices. You know, there's always going to be the birthday party where you want to have a piece of cake, or, you know, the holidays are coming up. So holiday gatherings where that's, you know, there's a lot of traditions around food and activities. And so, you know, making conscious choices that, okay, so today I'm going to enjoy this time with my family. I'm going to enjoy that piece of cake. And tomorrow I will, you know, make choices that are more in line with what I know nourishes my body. So it's really choosing those things deliberately and being very intentional about the choices that we're making.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good way to explain it. And I know you talk a lot about balance and how creating that holistic balance is very important for women navigating the peri and menopause seasons of their life. So I guess that really fits with that, isn't it? It's having that mindset as well about what living healthy is, so that you're not putting yourself under too much pressure to be what you think it needs to be, which for a lot of people is this perception of perfectionism, isn't it?
Perfection. Right. And it's so overwhelming. You go to the webs, you go to the World Wide Web and search, health for women or healthy, lifestyle. And there's just an overwhelming amount of information, an overwhelming amount of do this, don't do that. And, I really work with my clients to say, okay, let's make small incremental changes. Nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. I don't get it all right every day. But, choose the things that align with your values and feel good to you. And, as you begin to make those small changes, they add up. The little things start to add up to big things. So, being able to, step by step, make changes in whether it's nutrition or your exercise habits, just the little things incrementally make big changes.
Yeah, 100%. And if you are listening to the podcast as a regular listener, hopefully you are starting to hear the theme coming through, because this is music to my ears, and this is what the podcast is about, is trying to help people to see that being healthy actually is about, considering every part of your life and making small changes depending on what you need for where you are at that point in your life. And that it is those small changes that become habits that really do have a ripple effect and create that feeling of living a healthy, happy life. So yeah, you've explained that really well. Thanks, Lisa.
Right. So I think it's so important.
Go on.
I think it's so important. And I just love that theme coming through in your podcast, and being able to repeatedly hear that is just, vital for women, because there's so much out there that, tells us how to be perfect or how to live healthy. And so just, kind of giving them more support. And, I think that's so important.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that's going to be the message that we deliver through what you're going to share today about the topic, because it is really difficult to try to do what you think is everything. You can hear these things, and you'll hear in each podcast we talk about very different subjects and different things that you might be feeling and experiencing, but it is about taking what works for you. And I talk about it being like a box of chocolates. You pick out your favourites, the ones that are going to give you the most return. And, as we all do, we go for our favourites in a nice box, don't we? So this is exactly the same approach. It's finding what suits your requirements.
Right.
So talking about the menopause then, certainly here in the UK, it's a massive subject, and I think likewise in the US, but it's one that's gained a lot more attention, definitely in the past 12 months. I think it's always been a bit of a taboo subject, and something that's been at the butt of a lot of humour and jokes, but there's definitely an awareness building, which I know in the UK from a corporate employer point of view is way ahead of you guys in the US, which is brilliant, but I know you've got a lot of catching up to do. And it's good because it's raising, as I said at the start, awareness from males as well as females. So, I think we're at a point now, kind of that tipping point where we're on it's sort of a platform of really being able to start and make a difference in the education around this, to both help women go through the menopausal period of their life much better than they might have been previously, but also to have that cultural acceptance and support there from everyone, especially if they have a male partner or a male employee who they work alongside, that just has more knowledge of what it's about. So I'd really like to kick off by just getting that clarity on what perimenopause and menopause are, because there is, I think, definitely a misuse of the words. And again, we're at a changing point, aren't we, where perimenopause is very new to us.
Right. I think, that awareness and the education around it is so vital, because there is a lot of mystery. I mean, I didn't know until I was pretty much through it. That's what was happening to me. So, digging into it has really helped me be able to clearly communicate that with others and share that information. So when we talk about perimenopause, or what, used to be referred to as the change, it's really that time around when a woman is beginning to move from her, reproductive years to the non-reproductive years of her life. So it's the changes that are taking place in our body as we start to begin to like wind down from, having our families. And that time period really can last anywhere from 4 to 8, even up to 10 years. So this can be going on in our bodies for a long time. And it starts anywhere from our mid to late 40s, or even in our 30s, our late 30s, you can begin to see it. And, so some people don't experience the start of that, those changes until they're in their 50s too. So there's so much variability. So it's really hard to say, oh, when you're 45, this is going to happen and we're all going to, go down the same path. The symptoms that you see as well are, I read somewhere there's like over 42 symptoms that can be attributed to all these hormonal changes. But the ones that we always think of or make fun of, the hot flashes, the night sweats, the brain fog. Oh, mom must be going through the change. She forgot, to buy the groceries, or she put the milk in the cupboard instead of the refrigerator. So, those little slips that begin to happen. And that's what people are familiar with. But there's also symptoms like dry skin and itchy ears and, some more obscure type of things that happen as well. Menopause itself is really, once you've gone 12 consecutive months without menstruation or a period, that is the definition of menopause. So you've already been in menopause by the time you're able to confirm it, and then we move into postmenopause. But those hormonal changes really are what's driving the perimenopause time frame. That's kind of when everybody starts to see all the haywire changes.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation. And that was something that I learned a couple of years ago. Menopause officially is just the day 12 months after you last had your period. So it's a day, and yet people think that's the start of the menopause, isn't it? But yeah, I think the awareness that we're building now through this very recently, brought in term of the perimenopause is just going to help so many people, because as you said, there's lots of symptoms. And certainly for me, I'm 46 and I'm pretty sure that I am perimenopausal. But because a lot of the symptoms cross over with so many other things, like how can we really know for sure? Because most of us aren't able to get a test, are we? Unless there's something specifically wrong, that means we have to seek, medical support through our doctor to maybe have that certified. Certainly in the UK, it's not really common to go and be tested. It's more of a conversation if you go to get some support because you're worried about those symptoms.
Right. And there is testing you can do, but a lot of that is done more through functional medicine providers versus the traditional providers that you typically go to. So I encourage my clients to really kind of seek out someone that they feel comfortable with, but that, has a more holistic view to some of these things. But there's no real way outside of, doing some of that testing and really looking at, your hormone levels, the sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. There's no true measure. So it's really, you're kind of going by the instinct of all these crazy symptoms are happening, the irregularity of my periods, all of a sudden hot flashes and things like that.
Yeah. And do your periods have to become irregular, or is it that some women can have very regular periods and then they literally stop?
Yeah. And that's I think the whole mystery around it is that we're all so different and we all react differently. So some people will have, very heavy periods. You may not have it for a couple months and then it comes back, or other people could be spot on every 28 days like they've always been. And have very mild symptoms overall. So knowing for sure that you're going through all this doesn't happen until you reach that magical 12-month day. And then you're like, oh, hooray, I made it.
And I think that's the same with the symptoms as well, isn't it? You could have someone who's suffering quite severely with 1 or 2 symptoms, but then someone else who has 20 or 30 of the symptoms. And I think that's what can make it quite difficult, isn't it? And in your experience, are there any symptoms that seem to be the ones that are most, indicative of being in perimenopause?
For sure, I think it really is the disturbance of our sleep patterns and people complaining of night sweats. That's one that I see frequently. Then there's the shift in just how we gain weight. It starts to maybe accumulate more on our bellies and it doesn't go away in the same way. So, what used to work to lose that 5 pounds that you just put on over the holidays doesn't work anymore, no matter what you try. And trying harder doesn't help the situation. So it's really kind of shifting that thinking into, okay, how can I better support my hormones? And obviously, hormonal therapy is one option that some people choose. But I really try to focus on, let's optimize all of our hormones and health. And then, try to minimize symptoms as much as possible from that standpoint.
Yeah, so that brings us on really nicely to what I would like to share a bit more about with regard to the hormonal changes, because I think for many women, in my experience, there is a huge lack of knowledge of what is actually happening in their body. The menopause is kind of explained and talked about in terms of the output, if you like, but not the input, not what's causing it. So it's talked about as in the hot flushes, the night sweats, the weight gain, the change in libido, the mood swings, everything that is seen as a big negative. And then people are fighting kind of that uphill battle of, well, I want to change this, I want to stop it, but not going about it in the right way because they don't understand actually what it is that's causing all of those things. So if you can dive into that on the hormonal side, that would be amazing.
Yeah, our hormones are so intricately connected. So as our ovaries start to shut down and you start to produce less estrogen and progesterone, as well as testosterone, we have a lot of testosterone in our body as women. You start to see the changes related to that. Testosterone is responsible for helping us lose weight and increasing our muscle mass. So as that decreases and you aren't able to put on muscle as easily, obviously it starts to change how we process, our metabolism overall. There's also shifts in other hormones. So changes in our thyroid is very common among women in their perimenopause years. So you may see hypothyroidism where your thyroid's low, and our thyroid really kind of drives the rate of our metabolism overall. So it's kind of the gatekeeper, if you will, of the metabolism key. So making sure that that's optimal. And that's a test that's pretty routine and regular from most healthcare providers. So you can, if you think you're experiencing issues around that, get checked for that. But these changes in hormones also will affect cortisol, which is the stress hormone, as well as insulin and how our cells are more sensitive or not sensitive to insulin. Cortisol is our stress hormone. So when we're under a lot of stress, that increases. And usually after the stress has, been mitigated, it will go down. And insulin is really what helps regulate our blood sugar. So when we eat, our body releases insulin. As all these hormone changes start to take place, our cells are not as sensitive to the insulin. So you will see, weight gain in different ways because of what's called insulin resistance. So we really try to look at, okay, how can we best support balancing all of these hormones in a holistic way? What are some of the key things that we can do?
Yeah, I think you've explained that again really clearly. It is a combination of all of those hormones. And I know certainly when I've spoken to people or worked with clients who are struggling with weight gain at that perimenopausal age range, explaining that to them can suddenly give them that light bulb moment of why, they might be eating really well, they might be exercising, but they're just not able to shift those pounds. Mm-hmm. And, putting that information in front of them and explaining it really helps them to have perspective over why it's not just about the calories that you consume. It's so much more, isn't it? And that's the same at any stage of our life, and I massively advocate that. But certainly for women hitting that point in their life, it becomes absolutely critical, doesn't it?
Right. It's so key, looking at all of those factors that we preach about for health and wellness really just become elevated in this time of our lives because our hormones are so susceptible to any little change. So, you could be doing all the same things that you've done to be healthy up until that point and just not seeing the results or not feeling the way that you really want to feel.
Yeah. So how do you start then to be more mindful about what you need to support this big change in that whole spectrum of hormones?
There's really 5 key areas that I try to focus on. So we look at nutrition, we look at movement, managing our stress, our sleep, obviously, as we talked about earlier, and then hydration is another area that we really try to hone in on. And that, all those areas put together can be overwhelming, but it's really kind of taking stock and looking at each area individually and kind of making assessments and identifying changes that you can make.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned those 5 there. They're almost the same as my 5, but I have mine mindset instead of hydration. And yeah, I'm with you in that they are really foundational at every stage of your life, but to have that extra focus on those to really work out what it is you need. So nutrition's obviously a big thing, isn't it? That's one of the biggies for many women. We've mentioned the weight gain, and it can be a difficult point in their life because for women who've never experienced any problems with weight, they suddenly begin to put weight on for the very first time in their lives. So if, someone is struggling with the weight management side of health, what's something that they can do to change that if, their diet, or say they've had a pretty good diet, or maybe they know what they need to eat better with, but is there anything else you need to do other than just focus on the actual food? Are there certain types of food we should increase or decrease?
So from a nutrition standpoint, there's a couple of key drivers. So the first thing I always do is assess protein. How much protein are we getting? Because women are notorious for not consuming enough protein to really support our bodies in the best way. So ensuring that we're getting good quality protein, in the right amounts. And I always start with saying, make sure you have some protein with every meal or every snack, which seems sometimes counterintuitive to us to, think that we want to add in, but making sure that you have that good quality protein really begins to, if there is any insulin resistance going on, begins to really target that area. Then we look at, increasing our fiber through fresh vegetables, fruits, any non-starchy type of vegetable, increasing fiber as much as possible, and always looking to decrease sugar. In conjunction with that, the processed foods. So any processed foods, any sugar, and start to slowly pull any of that out of our diet that we might not even know that's there necessarily. So those are some of the key things. Always, I try to look at, adding in healthy fats versus and minimizing, some of the unhealthy fats when you think of, like vegetable oil or canola oil or margarine, trying to move those off of our plate as much as possible. We do work as well with some of the timing of nutrition or the timing of when we eat. Whether that's looking at intermittent fasting or, just trying to reduce snacks and things like that. So kind of really trying to optimize nutrition overall more than, even people that have eaten healthy for a very long time. It's really just kind of focusing in on some of those things.
Yeah, and I think intermittent fasting's an interesting one. It's something I've looked into and I've tried, and I know there's a lot of research being done on it to prove lots of health benefits, even in supporting type 2 diabetes and heart disease and so on. So, yeah, I mean, that's something we could do a whole other podcast topic on. But I think what you're saying there is, it's about the quality of food, isn't it? Someone could be a member of like some kind of weight loss club, or they're just on their own doing calorie counting. And I do try and speak quite openly about that not being very successful, I think, for anyone, but especially women around perimenopause, because it has to have the right food types in there, doesn't it? The right nutrients, so your macronutrients, your protein, the right fats, as you say, good carbohydrate sources as well. Whereas if you are working on a calorie counting only basis and those calories are coming from the wrong food groups, then even though you think you're eating enough or within the right limits, it's not necessarily going to be giving you the results that you're looking for. So yeah, that's really clear. And just on protein, because I know myself, but for anyone listening, what would be some really good protein sources to add in, and especially at breakfast, because I think that's one meal that is the harder one to get a protein source added into.
Right. So looking at breakfast, we really look at the quality of the protein is important as well, as you said. So, focusing on meats that are, whether if it's a grass-fed beef or pasture-finished chicken that's, antibiotic-free, hormone-free, pasture-raised. So looking at some of those types of proteins, but that can sometimes be more expensive and out of reach for some people. So I try to encourage them just to make sure you're adding in protein. So when we look at breakfast, eggs are a good source. But I also encourage my clients to think outside the box. So for years, I would have a salad with like leftover steak from the night before, and make a big salad mix for breakfast. And that was very satisfying, and it got me, it would give you the vegetables, it would give you the protein source, and drizzle a little bit of olive oil on it so you have a healthy fat. Some of the other things, that you could do is having a soup. If you're looking at adding additional protein, like looking for sausage or some of those things, I try to discourage people from moving into, a protein bar or a protein shake, because then we begin to add in some of those processed foods, especially with the bars. They're, if you look at the ingredients, they're not all, natural ingredients that you would normally find in your kitchen. So trying to not jump to those as your main source, but there's definitely options for snacks, looking at beef jerky or beef sticks. And obviously if you're a vegetarian, then looking to some of the more non-meat type of protein sources and adding those into your diet as much as possible. But we really try to target at least 30 grams of protein per meal. That gets us closer to the range where we want to be, but it helps really ensure that you feel full and you have the satiety between meals, so you're not wanting to have a snack because you're still, well supported nutritionally.
Yeah, and just from my experience, for many, many years, I used to go to weight loss clubs and I used to eat low fat, low sugar, count whatever it was. I'll not say which brand it was, but, making sure that I had the snacks and everything was low fat. And I struggled with weight for, probably maybe 20 years that was, on and off. And then I completely changed my diet when I came across the body coach about 6-7 years ago. And that was a massive kind of life-changing moment for me to realise how I could eat, because I love food, I do like nice meals, but how I could eat the kinds of foods and the portion sizes of food that I like, but without them having that limitation that I'd had when I was focused on it through a weight loss club. And for me, the big thing there was learning about the right proteins to have and bringing protein into every meal wherever possible. And there's days and meals where that doesn't happen. but I'm aware of that, and I try to add in more protein. So yeah, I definitely advocate looking at that, and if you need to, getting extra, knowledge and support if you can't find that information and make those changes on your own. So kind of linking into this, obviously a big part of balancing your hormones and managing this season of your life is movement, isn't it? It's exercise. And yeah, talk to me a little bit about that, then why that's so important.
Right. Moving helps reduce, cortisol. It also works on insulin resistance. So, as we've discussed, those are two big pieces in just our overall experience throughout the menopause journey or perimenopause journey. So I always say, make sure you're moving every day. 20 to 30 minute walk outside in nature if possible, because we know that, helps with stress as well. So getting some type of activity in, but it's also very crucial to have strength training, because as we talked about, that decrease in muscle mass, which is very important in women because it supports our bone health. So if we let our muscle mass deteriorate, our bone health will not continue to be, the bone density begins to drop, and that's where osteoporosis comes in. And we want to set ourselves up to thrive in our years going forward after menopause and be, active, healthy adults going forward. So getting in strength training a couple of times a week, even using your own body weight as resistance can be beneficial. If you've never done strength training, it doesn't all have to be around barbells and heavy lifting type of things. I also like to encourage some type of flexibility and balance training, just because, as we know, when we become older, that stability starts to decrease, and falls are very crucial. Like preventing falls is very crucial as we age, just for our overall health. And so really working on those key components. But I also like to encourage people, to listen to their bodies, because we also know that overtraining becomes more prevalent in this type of age range. So, if you're doing high intensity interval training 5 days a week and it works for your body and you feel invigorated and energized, then by all means continue it, because that's excellent work, obviously, for our cardiovascular system. But if you begin to notice that, there are days where I just don't feel good the next day, or, I'm not recovering as fast as I used to from a strength training session, that's a key sign that our body's saying, okay, I don't need as much. And I will see, as we start to kind of pare down some of that activity, women's bodies respond. So working out twice a day as hard as you possibly can is not what we need. We need to listen to our bodies and be kind to it. So, walking every day is an excellent way to incorporate movement and continue to build on that cardiovascular health, but also adding in, as our bodies permit, strength training, yoga, Pilates, activities like that.
Yeah. And there's lots and lots of research coming out now about the value of strength training and how strength training can actually be more beneficial to weight loss than cardio training. And I think personally, from everything I'm hearing, in the next maybe even 5 years, but definitely 10 years, I do think that there's going to be a much greater swing towards the value of strength training for everyone, full stop. But yeah, please, if you don't do any kind of strength training, really do look to add that in, whatever age you are, and if you are male as well, because for all of us as we age, I think it's from the age of 30 we start to lose 1% of our muscle mass each year, and for women, when we hit that menopausal stage, it becomes greater. And if you do have a history, like in my family, my mum had osteoarthritis, so I need to be super careful and considerate of building muscle as I age. So yeah, that's really, really well explained and good advice. So Lisa, everything, that is so connected, we can see that, and there's lots of things we can do to support ourselves. And as we said, it's about people finding what works for them. I think the big things are really being mindful of what you eat, the quality of food, getting enough protein, and definitely moving your body. And the strength training is a non-negotiable, that somehow you need to find time a couple of times a week at least to be doing some strength training as well as staying as mobile as possible. But given that sleep is one of the biggest things that's hit when we get to this stage, and we know, as we said right at the beginning, the impact of not having enough sleep. I certainly know how I feel the next day. How does someone who's really struggling, who isn't like you or I, who's already aware of what they eat and doing exercise and movement regularly, like when you feel utterly crap because you're not sleeping, and we know that triggers the stress hormone and lots of mindset issues as well. Like, how do you begin that? What advice do you give people to start to change the little things that could then impact having better sleep, to feel better, to do this other stuff as well?
Right. I think setting yourself up to have the best night quality sleep possible. So a dark room, if you need to get blackout curtains, because there's a street light outside your window, then, consider doing that. The temperature of the room is very important, especially when you're having hot flashes. I had to get a fan and set it right by the bed because, it was like so intense some nights. But there's also, cooling blankets and a lot of, really cool, interesting, high-tech type of stuff that, can adjust to your body temperature, because a lot of times that's what really drives some of our problem sleeping. But I will say there's a lot that has to do with, nutrition and movement as well. So be mindful of what you're eating and how it affects your, sleep patterns. Consuming alcohol before you go to bed definitely can cause, a lot of sleep-wake type of issues. Eating a large meal, more than 2 hours before or less than 2 hours before you go to bed will, also, trigger that for a lot of people, because your body's working so hard to digest. It can't focus on the restorative sleep that we need. Some people are more sensitive to caffeine. So, eliminating caffeine once you get past noon, that, helps clear it from our body in time for us to go to sleep. Then it's looking at some of our just overall lifestyle activities, like we're always on our phones, scrolling through Instagram thinking, okay, I'll just read this while I, fall asleep. So turning off the phone at least 30 minutes, before you want to go to sleep, and not watching TV in place of that. So getting the TV out of the bedroom when possible. There's just so much combined with that. But I will say one of the big drivers that I found early on for me was hydration. So making sure that you're well hydrated. And once you start really monitoring every little thing, and then I want to say, write down every little detail of your day. But I used a sleep tracker. I have a, fitness watch. I used a sleep tracker to kind of really monitor the quality of my sleep. But I also looked at what was I consuming going into the day before, and how did that affect my sleep? And then if I take out that glass of wine before bed, do I sleep better? And, making sure, did I get enough hydration the day before? And finding out that when I'm fully hydrated, when I'm, getting my steps in for the day, when I'm, consciously doing all those things, I sleep better. So that just, sets you up then for the next day to be, more successful.
Yeah. At the very start, it's about being aware, isn't it, of how you feel and what's going on. There's, such a connection between our minds and bodies, and it really helps to just have that awareness, sometimes taking that pause to think, why am I feeling like this? What is it that's going on? And having that as well will help you, as we say, to pick out what you need to focus on first, rather than just thinking, I've got to change everything, and then it becomes too overwhelming. Being really attuned to what's going on to give you what you need is really good advice. And the bedroom thing is something that so many people completely just dismiss and think, oh, it's fine, we all go on our beds at night, on our phones in bed at night, and likewise, we pick the phone up first thing in the morning. But people aren't aware of how damaging that blue light is. It's really impacting our body clock rhythm and our ability to sleep, to bring down that cortisol, that stress hormones, that we can have the hormone that helps us to sleep well, and so on. And a good tip that I heard from someone who'd experienced menopause was that in sharing her bed with her partner, she went from having, like the normal double duvet to having two singles, that she could have a really lightweight summer type one all year round. And that when she was then having a night sweat, she could throw that quilt off without, it being part of what the person next to us using and tugging at it, and so on. So, I think, as you said, there's lots of little things in our bedroom setup, our bed, our preparation for sleep that we can start to change. And maybe they're the first kinds of things that you could look at to help you to feel better, to then be in a position where you can look to change your nutrition, hydration and movement.
Yeah, I really like that idea. That's a great tip, because I've read, where women will have an extra set of sheets by the bed. Well, if you, are sleeping with a partner, that means you got to wake them up to change the sheets. And who wants to get up in the middle of the night to change sheets? I don't even like to do that in the daytime. Like that's the last chore I like to do. So, or, a change of clothes because you sweat through all your clothes. Those little things, are obviously things that you can do. But to me, like, I don't want to get out of bed to do anything, because that then makes me wake up more. So that little lighter blanket tip, that's a great idea. And if you can get a fan that's like blowing just on you, or, like the chilly mattress pads, whatever that's available, those are things that you can adjust. One side can be warm and one side cold. So, everybody can be comfortable in bed.
Yeah. So I think you've shared lots of tips around what you can do, and through the conversation it's really apparent what balance looks like. Is there anything else you would add about balance? Because I know that is a big focus of your coaching and how you support your clients.
I think the biggest thing that we really look at is stress management, because that is one of the key drivers of hormones overall. So our cortisol, which kind of, intertwines and drives all the other hormones, is really profoundly affected by our stress. It's, driven by our stress levels. And in our environments today, we are under stress constantly. And especially when you think about women in that perimenopause stage, they're in the middle of their careers, they're, supporting their families. There's so much going on in their lives that adding one more thing is the overload. That's the tipping point. So really looking at how can we reduce and manage stress before we try to overhaul everything else in your life. Let's, really focus on that piece of it, because I think that's so important.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I would just like to touch on as well and get your point of view on is, this whole, I guess, myth, but belief at the same time that many women have, or many people, in fact, that menopause is like the end. A lot of women see it as a very negative thing that happens to them. We've been brought up to believe and dread, the menopause, because we think it's going to mean we become someone completely different, and our life's at that point a downward hill, to the very end. So what do you think about that?
I think there's, so many examples out there right now of women who are thriving in their 50s and 60s. And, whether you look at, Hollywood actresses who are, laying on the beach, and not that we all need a beach body, but they're really embracing life. There's just something so beautiful about this point of our lives when you kind of get past that menopause, where I don't have to worry about periods. And that's not what it's all about, but there's also just the freedom of being more mature. You get to shift your mindset into being a woman who has experience in life and more maturity and more freedom in, what you think and do. And I think that's, your mindset piece of that being one of your pillars is a great example, and obviously something that's very important as we move through this whole transition, taking on a different mindset and being able to really embrace the time, to enjoy it, to really use it to our advantage, set yourself up to be in the optimal health so that as you move into your later 50s and 60s and even 70s and beyond, you're just able to thrive and be healthy and do the activities that you love and not be, disease stricken. And obviously there's some things that are out of our control, but, controlling as much as you can and making those choices to just kind of move forward in that manner.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we need to embrace this as a season. It's just another season of our life where things do change. And there's so many seasons in a female's life because of our reproductive system and things that we have that mean, we have these very special times of our lives and ones that do bring a lot of the time quite enormous change to us. But seeing it as usually like a gateway to the rest of our life, because there are, for most of us, so many years to come beyond menopause. And I do think it's really positive that there's so many ambassadors out there now who are talking much more openly about their experience of the menopause. And as you said, showing that they're thriving, and being honest about some of the challenges menopause brought through all of those perimenopausal years, but also how they've coped with it and what they're feeling as they've got to the other side, once they're post-menopausal. And I think, again, I mentioned at the start that definitely in the UK and Europe, there's a lot of businesses now investing in menopause training and support and even writing things into their HR policies and employee handbooks and so on to show that they recognise females experiencing the menopause can require some additional or different type of support during that stage of their life. So I think that as well is also going to really help to boost us, isn't it? Because if we know that people are aware and they're not judging us, which I think's been our past experience, then that's a real positive change, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that is just so refreshing to see that, they're really putting in the effort and focus to value women and the contribution that they make, but also realize that they need a little extra support, whether it's more time that you can, take or supporting them from the stress standpoint or mental health. I think it's so refreshing to know that they're valued in that manner.
Yeah. So if you are listening and you're an employer,
obviously in the UK, they're like still ahead of us as normal from the United States standpoint. But I think one of the things, and we're still in October as we're recording this, at least October was, Menopause Awareness Month, and there's an International Menopause Day. And so having just those little key things are a starting point, at least for bringing the awareness and providing the education and being able to do some of those things.
Yeah, and so I was going to say, if you are an employer or even an employee who doesn't have any support at work, then bring this to the table, ask about it, because I'm certainly having conversations with businesses about workplace wellness and culture and their policies and the issues that they're facing. And menopause is something that does often come up. And I know that there's some quite big organisations now who have this as one of their agenda items on their weekly board room meetings, even if that leadership team is, in that particular meeting only male attended, because they think it's very important that men also have an opportunity, an open table to be able to speak about any challenges they're having, either in their personal life with their partner experiencing this, or someone on their teams, or who, that they're just aware of in their social networks. So yeah, I think all of that is just a great positive. So if anyone is thinking, right, I know now that I definitely need to change some of the things, habits that I've got, because I'm hearing that the way I am living is probably contributing in a negative way to these changes I'm experiencing. What would you say is kind of the easiest things, like the simplest one or two little tips you could give for somebody to get started pretty quick in the next couple of days with building some new, better habits?
So one of the first things I would recommend is, looking at adding protein, getting enough protein in your diet. The other thing is, trying to find ways to decrease your stress as much as possible. So really doing a kind of self-evaluation, those two things combined will make big differences in just how you feel overall and the experience that you're having.
Yeah. So on the stress, the self-evaluation is a good one, isn't it? Just to maybe take 10 minutes if you can in the next day or two to think, what is it that keeps coming up for you and how does that feel? Just to start, and I talk about the small steps, and it's something like that, just thinking really small to begin with, to then build on, to get more awareness of what you're feeling, and then maybe look at what else is triggering that stress. And likewise with protein, even if you just think about one meal that each day that you can start to add protein in, and then get comfortable with that and then build on. So yeah, they're really, really good tips, because the stress one, I think when you are experiencing those hormone changes because of everything going on in your body, it's creating stress by the very nature of it, isn't it?
Right. We're just under constant stress. But if I can look through my day and say, okay, these are the areas where I feel the most stressed, or, and some of those things we may not be able to mitigate so easily, whether there's a deadline at work or things like that. But as employers become more aware, maybe, we can go and say, look, I'm not going to be able to meet this deadline unless you take these other projects off my plate. And maybe it's, approaching your partner at home. Like, I can't do the dishes, the laundry, and get the kids to soccer practice, all week long. I need a little more support. And sometimes, women are by themselves trying to do it all as well. But, finding little ways that you can reduce the stress in your life as much as possible, eliminating some of those things, practicing mindfulness or meditation, just incorporating some of those changes in. Small changes make a big difference. Even 5 minutes, doing a breathing exercise when you first wake up can make a big difference.
It really does, yeah. And I think the message that I'm hearing through all of this, and I'm, completely advocating this in my coaching as well, is that it's just about respecting yourself and knowing what you need, and not trying to have everything and think that by having everything, that's what's going to make you happy. It's just having that awareness, isn't it? And being able to pause and think, at the end of the day, we are machines. It's the same as any other actual technical type machine. In order to function optimally, it needs everything to be right and to work in harmony. We're the same. And so when we are beating ourselves up because we're not able to do everything, and we're not able to watch all of the TV everyone's talking about, or, have our homes perfect 100% of the time, or whatever it might be for you, that, we've got to try and ease back on that a bit and realise that when we are, for many of us, working, raising a family, running a home, have partners, friends, job, everything, career, we've got to be able to shift the balance between some of those depending on what we need to be able to thrive.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that
so it's been
so beautifully put, because all those things combined together that, we think are going to make us happy, just add to our stress level. And so kind of, dialing it back a little bit where possible.
Yeah. And I think if this has resonated with you and you may be realising that what you are struggling with is perimenopausal, that in itself is a big tick, because that gives you now the springboard to move forward with some new habits and things that are going to really support what you need right now. Because I think that's a challenge so many people face, not just women, but, everyone, when they're caught in this busyness of life, there isn't that opportunity to actually go, oh, this is not working for me, what can I do differently? So I've definitely and really enjoyed this and learned a lot, Lisa, and I think how you've explained it has been really clear as well, in a way that I'm sure a lot of people can understand and relate to. Good. And yes. Take something away with. So do you want to just share with everyone where people can connect with you and find out more if this is something that they'd really like to get extra support, or just, you know, some inspiration from you going forward?
Yes, they can find me on my website at drlisakhealth.com. And I'm also on Instagram by the same handle, and Facebook as well. I like to share different tips and ideas to support our health overall. I do also have a freebie, which I think that you have a link to in the show notes, that is a guide for just some of the things we talked about. So a little reminder tip sheet on how to really balance hormones naturally. So that's available. And I'm working on some exciting things coming up that will be a little more in-depth for that. And then obviously I have my coaching program where I work one-on-one with women to really help build the support around these things and help identify, you know, what their real values are and what is important to them, and move forward from there to really kind of hone in on making these changes and making it sustainable for them.
Yeah, so much then. It's all in the show notes. So please, if you do think that guide's going to help you, then download it and just take that as your first step on the back of this podcast to start making some changes and live healthier now, as it's all about. So thanks again, Lisa. It's been a pleasure chatting and getting to know you more. You're welcome.
Thank you so much.